Imagine standing in a modern editing suite. The screen glows in the dark. On it, a respected archaeologist sees his own face, his own voice. But the words coming out of his mouth have been sliced, diced, and rearranged. He is speaking about one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history. Yet the audio has been twisted to serve a wild conspiracy theory. This actually happened. The year was recent when this controversy erupted, sending shockwaves through the scientific community. To understand how a Turkish archaeologist's life's work would later be twisted into a global conspiracy. What secrets were waiting to be found the moment the first shovel hit the dirt? How did a monumental stone complex, built entirely by stone tool-using hunter-gatherers, become the center of a modern myth about a lost, high-tech global empire? For generations, the textbooks told us a simple story. They said humans could not build monuments before they learned to farm. They told us that agriculture was the mandatory first step toward civilization. But the soil of southeastern Turkey holds a truth that shatters this timeline, proving that we have drastically underestimated the power of the human mind. I will show you how raw human muscle, driven by a shared belief, accomplished the impossible long before the first seed was ever planted. In the 14-episode Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse, writer Graham Hancock claims the site's architecture was taught to primitive locals by survivors of an advanced Ice Age civilization destroyed by meteors 12,000 years ago. The show painted a picture of helpless, simple hunter-gatherer who were completely incapable of organizing themselves, let alone carving massive stones. According to this narrative, a global cataclysm wiped out a highly advanced empire, and the few survivors wandered the earth, acting as teachers to the primitive locals. It is a dramatic story, filled with mystery and cosmic doom. But this narrative ignores the actual archaeological record of the region in favor of a sensationalized myth. It assumes that because we cannot imagine building such monuments without modern machinery, our ancestors must have been equally helpless. This assumption is a fundamental misunderstanding of human capability. The evidence on the ground tells a completely different story, one that does not require space-age technology or lost continents to explain. Instead, it reveals a story of local adaptation and the sheer power of human organization. It shows that when humans share a powerful belief, they can move mountains. To understand why this site would soon cause such fierce debate, you have to look at its scale. The archaeological site is a massive mound measuring 15 meters, 50 feet, high, and covering 8 hectares, 20 acres. Imagine a hill of that size, completely filled with ancient secrets. It is not a natural hill, though it would be years before anyone realized that. It is a monument built by human hands, layer upon layer over centuries. Gobekli Tepe was constructed around 9500 BCE and inhabited until at least 8000 BCE, making its monumental stone circles roughly 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. Let that sink in. When the builders of Stonehenge were raising their stones, Gobekli Tepe was already older to them than Stonehenge is to us today. It existed before the invention of writing, before the discovery of metal, and before the first fields of wheat were ever planted. Yet despite its massive size and historical importance, only about 10% of the area has been excavated as of 2021. The rest of the site remains buried beneath the earth, visible only through ground-penetrating radar. The sheer scale of the unexcavated ruins suggests that our understanding of the site is still only in its infancy. What we have uncovered so far is just a fraction of a much larger, more complex network of stone circles. But what did they actually find at the moment of discovery? Decades ago, an archaeologist walked onto this dusty hill in southeastern Turkey. Local shepherds had complained for years about their plows hitting large, stubborn rocks just beneath the surface, but no one had paid them much attention. They assumed it was just another rocky hill in a region full of them. But this archaeologist looked closer at the limestone fragments scattered on the surface and realized they were not natural geological formations. They bore the subtle marks of human carving. He began to dig. Within weeks, the dry earth began to yield giant, T-shaped pillars. They were not simple gravestones or boundary markers. They were massive, highly decorated monuments. The stakes of history changed in an instant. The discovery did not just add a new chapter to the history books. It threatened to burn the old ones down. How did the actual scientific team excavating Gobekli Tepe respond when their own research was used to support the theory of a lost global empire? To support the lost civilization theory, alternative theorists needed validation from the scientists working on the ground. Gobekli Tepe's excavation director, Nekmi Karol, agreed to be interviewed for the Netflix series to share the scientific findings. After the show aired, Karol publicly stated that his interview for the Netflix series was manipulated and presented out of context. The production team edited out his explanations of hunter-gatherer technology, framing his statements as if science was baffled to leave a gap that the show could fill with theories of lost Ice Age empires. This manipulation highlights the deep divide between sensationalized television narratives and rigorous archaeological science. It shows how easily real, hard-won evidence can be twisted to serve a predetermined narrative. The scientists are not hiding the truth. They are uncovering a reality that is far more fascinating than any television fiction. But to understand why the public would later fall for the myth of a lost empire, what clues are hidden when we look at the stones themselves? Alternative theorists argue that the precision of the stone pillars requires advanced, lost technologies. In reality, the builders constructed the complex using limestone, burnt lime terrazzo, and possibly wooden roof beams, all without the use of metal tools, writing, or urban states. The massive pillars, some weighing as much as multiple large animals, were carved and moved using only flint tools, wooden levers, and raw human muscle. What was it actually like to drop into the scene? You do not have steel or bronze. You hold a piece of flint, a hard, glass-like stone chipped to a sharp edge. You strike the softer limestone of the quarry. Flint meets limestone. The sound is a constant, rhythmic tapping that echoes across the valley. The flint wears down quickly, meaning you must constantly chip new edges to keep the tool sharp. To move that massive pillar, you use wooden levers to pry it from the bedrock and place it on wooden rollers. You braid thick ropes from wild plant fibers. Dozens of people line up, their hands calloused, their muscles straining. They pull in unison, moving the stone inch by inch up the slope. It is slow, brutal work, but it is entirely possible. It requires no lasers, only time, patience, and human sweat. The stone pillars are heavily decorated with animal reliefs, featuring a total of 198 snakes carved into the pillars of a single structure, Building F, alone. These are not the simple scribbles of primitive minds. They are masterfully executed reliefs that project from the stone, showing a deep understanding of animal anatomy and artistic perspective. Step inside Building F. The air is cool, and the shadows of the giant pillars stretch across the floor, but one detail did not match. As you look at the stones, you realize they are alive with movement. Snakes crawl down the faces of the pillars, their bodies winding and twisting in patterns. They are not alone. Beside them are carvings of scorpions, boars, and venomous reptiles. These carvings do not depict domestic animals. You do not see sheep, goats, or cows. You see dangerous predators. You see beasts that threaten human life. This obsession with threatening wildlife suggests the site served a powerful symbolic or protective function for the people who gathered there. Perhaps these carvings were meant to represent the spirits of the wild, captured and tamed in stone. Or perhaps they were protective amulets, designed to ward off the real dangers of the surrounding wilderness. Whatever their purpose, they show a deep, symbolic relationship with the natural world. The builders were not just looking for food. They were mapping their cosmology onto the very stones of the temple. They were surrounding themselves with the most dangerous creatures of their world, carved in stone. For decades, the standard model of human history dictated that agriculture was the prerequisite for civilization. The theory went, farming created food surpluses, which led to division of labor, which then allowed for religion and monumental architecture. In this view, humans had to settle down first. They had to plant crops, domesticate animals, and build permanent villages. Only then, with a stable food supply, could they afford the luxury of priests, artists, and monumental builders. But Gobekli Tepe completely reverses this timeline. It shows massive monuments built long before the domestication of plants or animals. The builders were hunter-gatherers who lived off the land. They did not have farms. They did not have domestic animals. Therefore, the temple came before the farm. This discovery forced historians to ask if it was actually religion and ritual that drove humans to settle down, rather than agriculture. It suggests that our ancestors did not start farming because they were hungry. They started farming because they wanted to build temples. The search for the sacred came first. The need to feed the spirit drove the innovation that would later change the face of the earth. If Gobekli Tepe was a major center of human activity, one would expect to find a bustling ancient city surrounding the pillars. However, excavations have revealed no hearths, no domestic trash pits, and no permanent houses from its earliest phases. There is no natural water source nearby, meaning anyone staying at the site would have to transport water from miles away. The evidence reveals a shocking truth. Gobekli Tepe was not a city, but a regional sanctuary where people gathered temporarily. People did not live here year-round. Instead, they traveled from far and wide to reach this sacred hill. They gathered for rituals, festivals, and the construction of the monuments. Once the rituals were complete, they pushed onward, packing up their temporary camps and dispersing back into the wilderness. The site stood empty, a silent sentinel on the hill, waiting for the next gathering. But this seasonal gathering of people created a massive logistical problem. Without agriculture, feeding the hundreds of workers required to carve and transport the pillars was a monumental challenge. Archaeologists found massive piles of bones from wild animals, particularly gazelles and wild cattle, near the site. This indicates that the builders relied on large-scale communal hunts to sustain the workforce during construction phases. Imagine the logistics. Nomadic bands had to coordinate their movements. They gathered during the seasonal migration of the gazelles, working together to drive the herds into traps. The resulting slaughter provided enough meat to feed hundreds of workers for weeks. These gatherings likely doubled as massive seasonal feasts, drawing nomadic bands from far away. The construction of the temple was not a chore imposed by a king. It was a festival of cooperation, sustained by the abundance of the wild. Therefore, to keep this massive network of cooperation from collapsing, the builders needed a shared vision that transcended family ties. The T-shaped pillars themselves are stylized representations of the human form, featuring carved arms, hands, and belts. The top of the T is a head, and the vertical shaft is the body. Carved in low relief on the sides are long, slender arms reaching down toward the front, with fingers meeting just above a belt. Hanging from the belt is a representation of a loincloth. These giant, headless stone figures represent some of the earliest known anthropomorphic deities in human history. By creating these shared representations of the divine, scattered nomadic groups established a common identity. Before this, human groups were small and suspicious of outsiders. But these pillars represented something larger than any single clan. This shared belief system acted as the social glue needed to coordinate large-scale projects without a centralized government. You did not need a king to force you to work. You worked because you believed in the gods on the hill. But this system of gathering and feasting carried the seeds of its own transformation. As more people gathered at Gobekli Tepe for rituals and feasts, the local wild game and plants began to face unsustainable pressure. You cannot feed hundreds of people on wild resources indefinitely. The gazelle herds were hunted too intensively. The wild grain stands were stripped bare. To feed the growing crowds, the hunter-gatherers had to find a way to actively manage and increase their food supply. They had to transition from gatherers to producers. This is where the physical evidence becomes undeniable. Scientists have traced the origins of the world's oldest domesticated crops to the very region surrounding the site. It is here, in this specific region, that humans first began to select and plant the seeds of wild grasses. They did not do this because they had a sudden flash of genius. They did it because they were desperate to feed the crowds that gathered to build the temples. Thus, the need to sustain the temple rituals actually catalyzed the invention of agriculture. Rather than agriculture causing the temple, the desire to worship the gods forced humans to domesticate the earth. But once farming became the dominant way of life, the old world of the hunter-gatherer began to fade. The site was inhabited until at least 8000 BCE, after which the ancient builders stopped using the stone circles. Instead of simply letting the site decay, the structures were eventually covered by the earth over the millennia, leaving them preserved. The reasons why they stopped using this sacred site remain a mystery. No one knows why the builders buried these structures, leaving the old gods behind as they transitioned to a farming lifestyle. It was never established if they were preventing desecration, locking it away like a time capsule. The answer to how hunter-gatherers built Gobekli Tepe does not lie in lost high-tech empires or meteor-surviving sages. It lies in the power of human cooperation, driven by shared myths, ritual feasts, and social organization. We do not need to invent advanced civilizations to explain the achievements of our ancestors. The evidence shows that these hunter-gatherers were fully capable of engineering, art, and complex organization. By pooling their labor for religious purposes, these nomadic bands accidentally created the social structures that birthed farming. The real story of Gobekli Tepe is far more groundbreaking than any myth, proving that human culture and belief predated and shaped our physical economy. It shows that the human spirit is the ultimate driver of technological change. When we look at ancient monuments and assume humans couldn't build them without advanced help, we underestimate our own ancestors. This bias assumes that because those builders lacked metal tools, they also lacked intelligence. We look at their lack of metal tools and assume they were simple-minded. But the builders of Gobekli Tepe prove that the ultimate human superpower is not our tools, but our ability to cooperate around shared stories. They did not have machines, but they had the imagination to see a god in a block of limestone, and the collective will to carve it with flint. Today, we look at our challenges and feel small, forgetting how those builders moved massive pillars. We wait for better tools, better circumstances, or external solutions to save us. But those ancestors who carved a god in limestone prove that before you have the tools, you must have the vision. The capacity for greatness has always been within us, ever since those hunter-gatherers built Gobekli Tepe. So the next time you face a monumental challenge, do not wait for the perfect tools, just as those builders carved without metal. Build the vision, gather your people, and start moving the stone. What do you think? Were our ancestors far more capable than history books let on? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that subscribe button, and it would be years before they uncover the truth of what lies beyond Gobekli's 10%.